My father didn't whisper it. He didn't pull me aside or wait until the room was empty. He said it loud enough for everyone in the chapel to hear. "I won't walk you down that aisle." The words dropped like a stone into the silence, sending ripples through rows of polished pews and uniformed shoulders. The pianist froze mid-chord, the coordinator's clipboard slipped from her hands, and I stood there with a folded card trembling in my grip, a card with aisle cues carefully planned, a mission rehearsed. The crook of my arm meant for him was left hanging in the open. I felt the air shift. The sweet scent of flowers turned heavy, cloying. The sunlight streaming through stained glass fractured into jagged shards of color across my dress. Behind me I heard the faint scrape of a chair, the steady inhale of my commanding officer watching with trained stillness. My brother smirked from the corner, as if the humiliation had been rehearsed for him alone. My mother looked down, smoothing her skirt, pretending not to hear. My father kept his jaw locked, certain that his refusal had broken me, certain that no one could fill the space he had just vacated. What he didn't know was that I had seen this moment coming. What he didn't know was that when a formation loses one man, the others close ranks. The next day, when the doors opened and the music began, he would see that I didn't walk alone. What would you do if the person meant to stand with you decided instead to stand against you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you've ever witnessed quiet strength turn humiliation into respect. My earliest memories weren't of playgrounds or bedtime stories. They were of cadence calls echoing down base housing streets, of the faint smell of gun oil clinging to my father's uniform when he came through the door, and of a dinner table that felt less like a family gathering and more like a daily inspection. Rank didn't stay at the gate. It marched right into our kitchen. My father believed in a world measured only in push-ups, timed runs, and combat deployments. He'd remind us every night that respect is earned, never given, though what he really meant was that obedience was expected, and dissent was weakness. He had no patience for books unless they were manuals, no tolerance for curiosity unless it could be weaponized. My mother played the part of peacekeeper, her voice always smoothing the sharp edges. "Don't start an argument with your father, just let it go." I learned early that letting it go meant letting him win. I had a brother who thrived under those rules, the golden child who could recite football stats and pull up numbers with equal precision. At family cookouts, Dad would clap him on the back, boasting about his future as if it were already written in stone. My world was different. I kept notebooks, small, spiral-bound things where I tracked details, observations, and later training checklists. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. If the house ran on order, then I built my own version of it, quiet and contained, where I could prepare for a life outside his shadow. Sometimes at the table the jokes would land sharp, disguised as family banter. "So who's going to carry the family name into the core? Sure isn't you." My brother would smirk. My father would laugh. I would nod once, calm, never letting my face reveal the sting. That composure I discovered was its own kind of armor. When I left for ROTC, Dad didn't congratulate me. He inspected me, checked my shoes, my duffel, the angle of my salute as if my acceptance letter had been a mistake waiting to be corrected. "You outrank nobody at my table," he said once, staring across mashed potatoes and green beans like it was a battlefield. I didn't argue. I just replied, "Copy." Short, neutral, professional. The same way I'd respond to a training command I had no power to change. It was in those small moments, being brushed aside, dismissed, mocked, that the foundation for my resolve was laid. Every humiliation was a rehearsal, every silence a drill. I learned that in my father's house merit didn't matter, only hierarchy did. And hierarchy could be manipulated, enforced, or broken down depending on who set the rules. That understanding became my compass. Years later, when I sat at a wedding rehearsal holding a folded card with aisle cues and saw the hard line of my father's jaw, I recognized the look. It was the same expression he used at dinner when he reminded me whose authority counted and whose didn't. But by then I had spent years in real formations, in places where bearing and competence mattered more than bloodline and bravado. I had learned to stand still under fire, to carry weight without complaint, and to let silence become my ally. At home, I had been told over and over that I was out of place, a daughter trying to stand where only sons belonged. But at the end of those long, rigid dinners, I'd retreat to my room, open my notebook and write down what I'd observed, the timing of his moods, the phrases he used, the way control shifted with a single word. What began as a coping mechanism turned into a discipline: analyze, adapt, endure. I didn't know it then, but every page prepared me for a test much larger than grades or inspections. It prepared me for the day when my father would decide in front of everyone that he would not walk me down the aisle. A decision meant to shame me, to remind me of rank at his table. And a decision I would answer not with anger, not with pleading, but with the one thing he never expected: calm, unshakable command. The day of the rehearsal should have been simple. A run-through, a chance to iron out timing, to make sure no one tripped over chairs or forgot their cues. For most couples, it's a warm-up, a chance to laugh at mistakes. For me, it became a proving ground. The venue was a converted chapel overlooking the bay, the kind of place where sunlight poured through stained glass and threw fractured colors across the polished floor. Rows of white chairs fanned out neatly, and the faint scent of salt water drifted in through the open doors. Guests began to filter in, some family, some friends, and several from my unit. A couple of lieutenants I'd mentored, a staff sergeant I'd trained with, and even my commanding officer, who had accepted the invitation more as a gesture of respect than social obligation. They came in service dress, crisp uniforms that seemed to cast a sharper contrast against my family's civilian clothes. My father noticed it immediately. His jaw tightened and his posture grew rigid, as if the presence of uniforms turned the rehearsal into an inspection he hadn't prepared for. He didn't greet my CO. He didn't shake hands with the NCOs. Instead, he barked small comments that were meant for me but loud enough for others to catch. "So who's walking who tomorrow? Your commander walking you?" He smirked. "Maybe you'll march instead of step." It was meant as a joke, but the silence that followed told another story. The pianist stopped mid-scale. A bridesmaid shifted uncomfortably. I simply replied, "Confirmed," my voice flat, professional, offering no fuel for the fire. Later, as the coordinator tried to arrange cues, my father stepped into the aisle. "Back straight," he muttered under his breath, as though I were a recruit in formation. My mother hissed a soft reminder, "Just agree with him today, don't cause trouble." Her words floated like a stage whisper, designed to be heard, designed to remind me who was really in control. My brother leaned against a pew, arms crossed, wearing that same smirk I'd seen since childhood. He didn't need to speak. The look said it all. This was his game, his field, and he was already watching me lose. But I wasn't losing. I was taking notes. From across the room, my best friend, a staff sergeant who had pulled me through more than one night march, caught my eye. His hand brushed the seam of his trousers, the smallest signal, a quiet readiness. He leaned close enough to murmur, "Ma'am, say the word." I shook my head once. "Not yet. We do this clean." That was the thing most people never understood. In the Corps, silence can carry more weight than shouting. Bearing is a weapon, and I wasn't going to waste mine in a rehearsal hall, no matter how many little cuts my father tried to deliver. By the time the practice run began, the atmosphere was thick. The pianist's fingers stumbled, the coordinator fumbled with her clipboard, and even the photographer looked hesitant to raise his camera. Every step down that aisle felt like a gauntlet, not because of the distance, but because of the eyes. Civilian relatives watching with curiosity, fellow Marines standing in a quiet, disciplined line, and my father looming, waiting for me to falter. Halfway through the walk, my father excused himself for a call. When he returned, there was something final in his expression, the kind of cold certainty I'd seen before inspections gone wrong, before commanders delivered bad news. He didn't need to announce it. I already knew. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, he would make his decision public, and standing there in the colored light of the chapel, I realized the rehearsal wasn't practice at all. It was the opening move in a confrontation I'd been preparing for my entire life. The next day, the air outside the chapel was heavy with the scent of fresh-cut flowers and salt off the bay. Guests filed in with careful steps, some in pressed civilian suits, others in dress uniforms that caught the afternoon sun. The chatter dimmed as the rehearsal began its final run. Everything seemed ready, chairs aligned, music rehearsed, candles trimmed, everything except the one role no one expected to collapse. I stood at the back, aisle card folded in my hand, my bouquet trembling just slightly with each breath. My father stepped into position beside me, his face carved from stone. For a moment I thought he might hold the silence, let the performance play out. But then he leaned in, not whispering, not yelling, just projecting his words enough for every guest in the first few rows to hear. "I won't do it. I won't walk you down that aisle." The words sliced through the chapel like a drill instructor's bark. The pianist froze, his hands hovering above the keys. The photographer's flash caught me mid-step, my arm half extended, the crook of my elbow empty where his should have been. A ripple passed through the crowd, an audible intake of breath, the kind of silence you can feel pressing against your skin. I looked around. My commanding officer's eyes were sharp, his posture locked. A captain I'd mentored shifted uncomfortably, lips pressed into a thin line. A bridesmaid's hand trembled as she held her flowers. My brother leaned against a pew, smug satisfaction etched across his face. He didn't need to say anything. His grin screamed victory. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Years of training, of standing at attention in the face of chaos took over. My voice stayed level. Understood. That was all. No defense. No collapse. Just acknowledgement, crisp and clean, as though I'd been handed an unexpected field order. Inside, my pulse thudded like a drumline. But I forced my breathing into a rhythm I knew well. Inhale 4 counts. Exhale 4 counts. Reset. I wasn't just a bride standing abandoned at the altar. I was an officer analyzing the field, calculating contingencies. The humiliation was complete, and he wanted it that way. He wanted the story retold in whispers. She couldn't even get her own father to walk her down the aisle. He wanted the moment etched in photographs. His refusal, my silence. But what he didn't know was that I had already rehearsed this outcome in my head 100 times. I stepped aside, the bouquet steady now, and checked my phone where it rested in my palm like any other piece of issued gear. One text blinked at me. Contingency A, escort by a friend. Contingency B, walk solo. Both plans had been considered. Both were viable, but neither was what I chose. From the corner of my eye, I caught my CO's subtle nod, the almost imperceptible signal between professionals who had served long enough to recognize the shape of a plan. He didn't rise, didn't announce anything, but the message was clear. I wasn't standing alone. Not anymore.
The coordinator stumbled over her clipboard, stammering apologies. Guests whispered, some shifting uncomfortably, others pretending to look at the stained glass instead of at me. The humiliation was raw, but beneath it, something harder and steadier was taking shape. I would not be defined by his absence. If he refused the role, others stood ready. If he abandoned me, protocol would replace him. Because in the Corps, when someone fails to show up, the formation closes ranks. And as I stood there in the silence he had created, I realized this wasn't the end of my ceremony. It was the beginning of a different kind of march. The rehearsal ended in a fractured silence, but by then the damage was done. My father had made his choice. He believed he'd shamed me in front of everyone, family, friends, even my fellow Marines. He thought he had left me standing alone. But what he didn't see was the quiet exchange of looks, happening just beyond his narrow field of vision. After guests began to filter out, I stayed behind with my CO, my first sergeant, and 2 NCOs who had served beside me through long nights of field problems and miserable training exercises. They waited until the chapel was nearly empty before stepping closer. The first sergeant cleared his throat, speaking low, his voice steady. "Ma'am, if I may, we can fix this." I studied their faces. Not pity. Never pity. What I saw was the same expression I'd seen before a ruck march in the rain, before a live fire exercise, before the first step onto a helicopter deck. Readiness. "I don't want a scene," I said quietly. "This isn't about proving a point." My CO shook his head. "No disrespect intended, Captain. But it's not about you anymore." Not entirely. He made it public. Every soldier and Marine in this room saw it. If we let that stand, the story spreads unchecked. If we step in with discipline, the story changes. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't anger. It was protocol. They were thinking like professionals, like soldiers protecting their own. The plan they offered wasn't dramatic. No saber arch, no speeches, no confrontation. Just a silent show of solidarity, one that would mean everything to me and nothing to the gossip mill. The first sergeant laid it out simply. "We'll form an honor walk, nothing fancy. 2 at a time, shoulder to shoulder, from back to front. Rotate out, peel away. You won't be alone for a single step." I hesitated. This isn't tradition. I don't want to turn my wedding into a formation. My CO leaned forward, his voice calm, almost gentle. "With respect, Captain, it's not a formation. It's family. The one you chose. The one you earned." Those words landed with a weight I couldn't ignore. Family. For years I had been told blood was thicker than water, that loyalty to kin outweighed everything else. But in every crisis, in every humiliation, it wasn't family that had steadied me. It was the ones who wore the same uniform, who shared the same silence under pressure. I looked at the faces around me. My first sergeant, who had pulled me through an endless field op when I was a brand new lieutenant. The NCO who once found my lost ring during a mudslog night march and quietly pressed it into my hand without a word. My CO who had never treated me as an exception, only as an officer expected to do her job. I swallowed hard. All right, but no spectacle. We do it clean, bearing intact, no headlines. The first sergeant gave a tight nod. Roger that. We rehearsed once, quietly, in the empty chapel. 2 NCOs flanking me for a few steps, then peeling off into pews, replaced by the next pair. No one clung, no one dramatized. Each escort lasted seconds, but each step was steady, deliberate. At the end, my CO paused a single stride behind me, not taking my arm, not stealing the moment, just standing guard. The message was clear. I would finish the walk myself, but not one person could say I had walked it alone. By the time the lights dimmed and the chapel emptied, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation of my father's refusal still burned, but it no longer felt like a void. It felt like an opening that had been filled, not with anger, but with quiet strength. The next day, as the sun dipped low and guests filled the rows again, I stood at the threshold. I thought of my father's face, his cold refusal. Then I looked past him, to the silent figures waiting, ready to take their places. This was no longer about his absence. It was about their presence. And when the music began, I wasn't bracing for humiliation. I was ready for a different kind of march. That evening, the rehearsal dinner felt more like a standoff than a celebration. Plates clinked, glasses filled and refilled, but every exchange was weighted, every glance edged with unspoken tension. My father sat at the head of the table like it was still his command post, shoulders square, voice carrying just enough for the room to hear. He framed his refusal as principle. Tradition matters, and when you break it, you cheapen it. A father walks his daughter down the aisle. That's how it's done. If you want to play soldier, don't expect me to play along. His words weren't just aimed at me, they were aimed at anyone who had witnessed the afternoon's humiliation. A declaration that he wasn't backing down. My mother tried her familiar tactics, leaning in with quiet urgings, her hand brushing mine under the table. Just compromise. Let him save face. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. But the harder truth was already written. The choice had been made in public. There was no undoing it. I set my fork down, looked at both of them, and drew the line as cleanly as I would in an operation order. Tomorrow there will be no confrontation. Be seated or be absent. Those are the only 2 options. My tone wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Years of drill instructors had taught me that command isn't about volume, it's about clarity. A few relatives murmured their disapproval. One uncle muttered something about me being hard-headed, just like your father. A cousin whispered that maybe they shouldn't attend at all. I didn't chase them. I didn't plead. In the Corps, when someone drops out, the mission continues. Meanwhile, among my soldiers and fellow Marines, a different current was moving. My phone buzzed quietly with messages. "We've got you, ma'am. Bearing stays sharp. No one walks alone." Even a young specialist I barely knew from a joint exercise wrote a simple line that made me pause. Thanks for teaching us that calm is stronger than noise. I reread that message twice. Calm is stronger than noise. It summed up everything I had been holding inside for years. That night I repacked my wedding go bag, the same way I would before a field problem. Safety pins, moleskin, blotting papers, hydration tablets, even a compact flashlight. The wedding wasn't combat, but preparation was habit, and habit was comfort. As I zipped the bag, my phone lit again. A new message, this time from my father. You can still fix this. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, just a demand framed as an offer, as if I were the one who had broken something. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. For years, I had chased his approval, trying to fix cracks that were never mine to mend. Not anymore. The house was quiet. As I lay down beside Jack, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand rested on mine, a steady weight, grounding me in the silence. Tomorrow, the pews would be filled. Tomorrow, the music would play. Tomorrow, my father would either sit down or walk out. But whatever choice he made, the plan was set. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought steadied me. Family might fail, but formations hold. The morning of my wedding broke clear and sharp, sunlight cutting across the bay like a blade. The venue filled slowly, the rows of chairs a patchwork of dress blues and pressed suits, friends and fellow service members blending with family who kept their distance. The chapel smelled faintly of peonies and polished wood, but beneath the sweetness was the unmistakable undercurrent of tension, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. I stood in the vestibule, bouquet in one hand, aisle card in the other. Through the doors I could see my father seated in the front row, stiff-backed, his expression carved into that same mask of authority I'd known my entire life. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His silence was its own verdict. The music began, soft piano chords rolling across the room. The coordinator gave me a gentle nod. Ready. I stepped forward. Two figures peeled silently from the pews at the back. A staff sergeant on my left, a medic on my right. They didn't take my arms like replacements, but matched my stride, flanking me like watchful sentries. 6 steady steps, and they peeled away without a word, returning to their seats. Another pair stepped in. My old roommate from OCS, now a lieutenant, and a quiet supply sergeant, who had once returned my lost ring during a field march. Their presence was brief but solid, a living wall that carried me forward a few more steps before slipping aside. The next escort was the first sergeant. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just offered his arm for the span of 5 heartbeats. His sleeve brushed mine, his presence steady as a stone wall. Then he too peeled away, leaving space for the next. Guests shifted uneasily, whispers rippling in their wake. Hands clutched their pearls, uncles leaned forward in confusion. But the service members in the crowd understood. They saw the rhythm, the discipline, no chaos, no spectacle, just a silent, deliberate show of respect. I caught sight of my father's face as I drew closer. His jaw was tight, his eyes burning with something between fury and disbelief. He had expected me to falter, to stumble down the aisle alone, diminished. Instead, every step refuted him. Finally, my CO moved into place, not at my side but one step behind, a silent shadow. He didn't touch me, didn't claim the role my father had rejected. He simply nodded once, his eyes steady. The message was clear. Finish this on your own, but know you're not alone. I walked the last stretch by myself, the piano rising gently, the light streaming through stained glass painting my dress in fractured color. My heart beat hard, but my steps never faltered.
At the altar, Jack stood waiting, his face calm, his eyes warm. For the first time all day, I let myself breathe. The vows were short, precise, spoken in voices that carried not just love but respect. We didn't promise fairy tales. We promised presence, steadiness, to hold the line when the other faltered. When the ceremony ended, the guests rose in applause, not thunderous, not chaotic, but a measured, genuine sound that filled the chapel like warm air after a storm. As we turned to leave, I glanced once more at the aisle behind me, empty now, but still humming with the echoes of boots and polished shoes. The path I had feared would expose my isolation had instead revealed my strength. My father sat stone-faced, unmoved as the crowd clapped around him, but it didn't matter anymore. I hadn't needed his arm. I had walked with a formation, and I had finished, as I always had, with bearing intact. The reception began like any other, tables dressed in white linens, a modest cake with clean lines, glasses of champagne sweating in the late afternoon sun. But beneath the polite laughter and clinking silverware, the weight of what had just happened lingered like a second presence in the room. I gave no speech. There was no need. The ceremony itself had spoken louder than words, but when it came time for the toast, I lifted my glass and said only one thing, to the ones who show up. The words hung in the air, simple and unadorned. The soldiers at the back raised their glasses in unison. Some of my relatives hesitated, eyes darting toward my father before they followed suit. He tried once to reclaim ground. As the music softened and guests moved between tables, he approached me by the patio doors, his suit jacket stiff at the shoulders. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but sharp. I stepped outside with him, the cool air off the bay wrapping around us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't waiting for his judgment. "You embarrassed this family," he started. "Parading soldiers like that, making a mockery of tradition." I held his gaze. "You chose to step out. I chose not to fall." His jaw tightened. He wanted a fight. Something loud, something he could control. I didn't give it to him. Going forward, I said calmly, here are the terms. You'll treat me with respect, or you'll keep your distance. Those are the only options. My tone was flat, the same voice I used in a briefing room. Clear, professional, unshakable. For once he didn't have an immediate retort. He turned away, muttering, but the silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Back inside, I found myself surrounded by quiet recognitions. A young corporal approached hesitantly, almost apologetic. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but soft, "thank you for showing us that bearing matters more than blood." His words carried more weight than all the formal congratulations combined. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music slowed, I collected my aisle card from the coordinator. The paper was creased where my hand had trembled the day before, but now it lay flat, smoothed out, a plan executed. I slipped it into my bag, not as a keepsake of humiliation, but as evidence of resilience, proof that the mission had been fulfilled, even if not as originally scripted. As the night wore down, I stepped back into the now empty chapel. The air smelled of candle wax and fading flowers. The aisle was quiet, stripped of the music and whispers that had filled it hours earlier. On the floor, just near the second row, I noticed something small, a brass button, loose from an NCO's jacket during a congratulatory hug. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should have, like a coin minted in respect. That was the true inheritance of the day. Not the absence of a father's hand, but the presence of a unit that had closed ranks when one man stepped out. By the time the last lights dimmed, I understood something my father never would. Blood ties may fray, but discipline, respect, and chosen family endure. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing against him. I felt like I was standing on my own. Some victories aren't loud. They don't come with cheers or parades. Sometimes they arrive in silence, when the people who said you'd stand alone are forced to watch as others step up beside you. That day my aisle wasn't empty. It was lined with respect, with bearing, with the quiet presence of those who had earned the right to be called family. And no refusal, no cold silence from the front row could erase that. Have you ever watched respect appear quietly because someone kept their bearing when it mattered most? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories. If this one resonated with you, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that quiet doesn't mean weak. And when you're done here, check out our previous stories waiting on screen. Other moments where arrogance was silenced and respect spoke louder. We post a new story every single day. Discipline, dignity, and the quiet strength that outlasts arrogance. That's what Echoes of Revenge stands for.